If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. I'm Kathryn Hansen, your host, and it's my goal to inspire you to believe that you can live a completely binge-free life, and to give you a simple and practical way to get there. I understand what it's like to feel so out of control around food. There was a time long ago when I thought binge eating was something I was stuck with. I tried what I thought was everything, but I couldn't seem to stop myself from eating massive amounts of food, and then exercising for hours on end to attempt to compensate for that. But I did find a way out, and to honor a promise I made to myself when I was struggling, I set out to write a book to share my story, which eventually became Brain Over Binge, which I published in 2011. For a while, I've wanted to update the book, but with raising 4 kids and the work I already do to provide resources for binge eaters, I had trouble finding the time. But I finally zoned in on it in 2021, and I created a second edition of the book, which I just published last month in April of 2022. This episode is going to be different than any other one so far, because I'm the one who will be interviewed in this show, actually by my boyfriend, who had an idea to do a show where he would ask me questions about the book that listeners may want to know. I thought it was a great idea, and because he is relatively new to the subject of binge eating, I think the interview will provide you with a fresh and interesting perspective. We've recorded this episode in 2 sessions with many outtakes along the way, many emotions and some laughs, and so many meaningful lines of discussion, and some interruptions from my kids. I've put what I think are the best and most helpful parts together for this show, and I even left in some of what I thought would be outtakes because I think it will help you get to know me a little better. Speaking of getting to know me a little more, if you read the first edition of Brain Over Binge, you may remember that I was married at the time, and we remained married for 15 years. If you've already read the second edition, you know that I'm no longer married. I got divorced in 2019, and maybe I'll talk more about that on the podcast one day because it was definitely a challenging time, and I know many of you can relate. I met my boyfriend Jeff, who will be interviewing me, last year in July of 2021, during a time when I was very focused on the book and committed to not spending much time at all dating. He was amazingly patient with my seemingly endless hours of writing, proofreading, and publishing the book, as well as recording the audiobook, and it was really nice that he showed so much interest in Brain Over Binge and wanted to do this interview. I hope you'll enjoy our conversation, but more importantly, I hope that it gives you a glimpse into how the book could help you overcome binge eating, because that is the ultimate goal of this book. My mission in the second edition of Brain Over Binge is the same as it was in the first edition, and the same as it was when Brain Over Binge was just an idea. To explain this a little more before I share the interview, I'm going to read the last paragraph from the book's preface. And as a little side note, I know that regular podcast listeners will recognize the last line of this paragraph, which was inspired by how I end every episode. In the preface, I said, "From the moment I started writing Brain Over Binge, I told myself that if I could change one person's mind, give one person hope, or save one person's life, I would have done enough. It's been over 11 years since I first published this book, and I'm grateful to have already accomplished what I set out to. The book has had an impact on people's lives far beyond my expectations, but my goal to help one person, you, the reader, is the same. I hope my story inspires you to believe that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life." And now I'll share my interview with Jeff.
Are you ready? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Should I do an intro? Should we do an intro?
Yeah, you should just... You could talk about the fact it was your idea.
Okay.
Like, to do an interview just so people can get to know the book more and get to know me more. And...
Yeah. And like the real version of you. I've listened to your podcast.
It's a little scripted.
It's a little scripted.
It is. I don't do well talking on the fly as much. I've gotten better over the years.
Yeah.
And that was part of the reason I didn't record my own audiobook the first time, because I'm just a better writer. I am.
Yeah.
I'm a much better writer than I am a speaker. So it took a lot to create a podcast and then to have, to challenge myself to do the audiobook this time.
You did a really good job.
But eventually I'll let go of podcast scripts, maybe. I'm almost at 100 episodes. So
oh, wow.
This might be episode 100. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It may or may not be.
This is historic.
I know.
99 or 100. Do you write every single podcast out?
Pretty much.
Wow.
Well,
That's a lot of writing.
typically for interviews, I don't. I'll write some basic questions, but then me and the guests get, talking and things come up and things like that. But most of the time, if it's just me, I write it. Yeah.
Huh,
I try to act like I'm not reading, but it's hard. Like I lose track and I wish I was one of those people who could just. I feel like you can just talk on the fly a lot better.
But nobody wants to hear what I'm saying. Okay, so let's do this. All right, I have a scripted question.
Okay.
But I'm not going to read it. Why write a second edition?
It's a good question. It's something I've wanted to do for a while. I published the first book in 2011, and there was just some things I felt like I could say differently, some things I could streamline, some things I could just make it a little more clear, and also I wanted to rewrite some things that line up better with what I currently believe. Honestly, it's a really fundamentally the same book because this was my story. I couldn't alter that. I'm almost 17 years recovered, so to go back and try to remember my story is not possible. I really just wanted to revisit my story and present it in a way that I feel like will be very helpful, more helpful to people now and then into the future.
Yeah. So how many years has it been? Like
2011. So like 11 years.
Yeah, I do.
It was my goal was a 10-year edition, but it didn't happen. I have 4 children and
and a very needy boyfriend. And so in the last 11 years, what is something within the second edition that you felt like you wanted to highlight, that you wanted to make sure that you kind of incorporate in the Brain Over Binge?
I think the biggest thing was to try to really clearly communicate that this is my story, and what is in my story is not necessarily going to line up with everyone's recovery. Like, my goal is to give someone inspiration, to give someone useful concepts, to give people practical advice, to explain kind of what didn't work for me and how I eventually use the power of my brain to recover, but also to clearly communicate that my way is not the only way and that everyone should use what is uniquely helpful for them.
So your approach, do you feel like over 11 years that solidified that approach?
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, I shared my story hoping it could help one person. And the more people I hear from, the more people it helps, the more people just free themselves of this without solving everything else in their life, without needing to fix. I mean, I spent so many years thinking I needed to fix my emotions or something was fundamentally wrong with me. And to be able to solve it and have other people solve it and just walk away from it. And just in myself, the fact that my recovery, is almost 17 years now. I think in the beginning when I first stopped binging, there was a little hesitation. Like, is this real? Is this something that I stopped so quickly? And yeah, I mean, I've seen it solidified in myself. I've seen it solidified in others. So yeah, it just really sparked that desire to go ahead and write that second edition.
So why though? Because I read your book. The approach makes so much sense once you read it, right? But again, I was like a traditional, well, you have to go to therapy and it's, this wound that you must cure. But as we've talked about, you don't have to do that when you quit cigarettes, right? So you don't have to do that. Like, why is the line, well, eating disorders, you have to go to therapy. But if you want to quit smoking, you're good. You just do that on your own. So why did we create that line?
It's a really interesting question because I don't think there has to be one. Like, yes, even in smoking, if someone feels like they need therapy, fine. If that's helpful to you, great. But you still have to break the habit. And I feel like it's the same for an eating disorder. If you feel like you need therapy for any reason, absolutely. If it helps you, go for it. And that's, I think, a big change in this new edition is that I am more supportive of that. I feel like I was a little too antagonistic of therapy. It didn't help me. It didn't. And I really wanted to get that strong message out. But I also, like in this book, acknowledge more that different paths work for different people. And you may need it for one reason or another. But you don't have to solve all your problems.
But do you feel like, because of the traditional approach to therapy, and I think a lot of things that are probably more necessary for therapy deal with a traumatic event. And it sounds like, again, in your book, like that's what they were trying to find, right? The triggers or the things, in their past. So like they were linking this to a traumatic event. Is that the flaw?
I think it is a big part of it for sure. Like, because bad habits and addictions can sometimes happen after traumatic events, and we could probably talk about that for a long time as far as why and how that happens. But in my case, that wasn't the case. The traumatic event was dieting. I mean, that was physiologically traumatic to my body. You put your body in a starvation state, your body is going to react. And that is the case for so many people. And yeah, there's the people with the trauma as well, or, maybe they don't diet and there is trauma and they get themselves in a bad habit, addiction. But I think assuming that everyone has trauma, it just sets people up for thinking something's wrong with them.
And I love it too, how you open your book, because you're in the doctor's office and you talk about, I used to be a binge eater. And what did the doctor say again? I can't remember. Well,
he asked me, I was having some stomach problems, and I told him that I was a binge eater in the past. So he asked me if I recovered, and I said, yeah. And he said, well, I assume you went to therapy. And I was like, well, yeah. And then I realized it was just a habit and I quit. And he seemed really doubtful of that. And he kind of looked at me strange and he's like, well, I'm sure it was fulfilling some need. And I was like, wow, that's what I had been told for so many years in therapy, that I was binging to stuff down emotions, to cope with my life as a way to distract myself from my problems. And
no, but it's so fascinating too, because again, you go because you're trying to find help, right? We're not doing something that is healthy. And we're trying to, go and find a healthy path. And then you have doctors saying, oh, no, you're not healthy.
Yeah, it's like stopping binging was supposed to be the side effect of all these other changes I was making in my life, when really it was the only fundamental change I needed to make to be free of bulimia, of binge eating disorder.
And at that time, too, because you started writing this in 2006, am I correct?
Started writing it?
Yeah.
Yes, because I recovered in 2005, and I started writing it maybe 6 months after that.
Okay, so 2005, 2006, you started writing it. Was there, besides rational recovery, was there anything else around eating disorders that took this approach?
Not that I had found. I mean, everything I had found up to that point was very much, it's a coping mechanism. That is the prevailing theory at the time. It's still the prevailing theory. I mean, I feel like there has been some progress, and I like to think my book is a part of that. But it's a coping mechanism. There's something wrong in your childhood. There's something wrong with you, your personality, how you handle life, how you handle emotions, and you need to correct all that before you can stop the behavior. Or maybe you can stop the behavior, but it's never going to fully go away. It's always going to be a part of who you are. You're always going to have to watch out for triggers. You're always going to, it's sort of part of your identity. But I just found that wasn't the case.
The things that I still think are prevailing out there with the books and other books that are of the same genre, there's still a lot of triggers around, well, don't eat sugar, because sugar's going to then trigger the behavior, and then you're going to go down this pathway again. And again, you're giving sugar power then, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge topic. We could probably make a whole podcast about that, but that's something that has changed, I think, in recent years, because when I was recovering, there wasn't a whole lot surrounding sugar addiction. A little bit. Like, there was Overeaters Anonymous, which encouraged giving up sugar and flour, which I tried for a bit. But now there's a lot around food addiction. A lot of people out there saying, oh, eating processed foods is like drugs, and you can get addicted to it in the same way. And there is some truth to that in regards to our brain pathways, our reward centers, pleasure pathways in our brain. There is, but that's a lot of pleasurable behaviors or like that. And it doesn't rule out choice. Like, just because we have this reaction that makes us desire things doesn't mean we have to then act on them.
And that was your aha moment.
Oh, totally. I mean, it changed everything.
Yeah, and because, again, as you describe, and it's been described in a lot of different research papers of brain chemistry and connectivity, those synapses were routed in that fashion. That habit, as I'm using quotation marks, habit, is really your brain chemistry stating that this is what I need to do right now. Oh, totally. And so you're having to rewire your brain. And that can't take immediately. That's got to take time to
absolutely,
to start reformulating.
Yeah. For sure, because I spent so many years following that habit and reinforcing those pathways that I basically taught my brain that I needed to binge to survive. And that's what it felt like. That's what I'm sure anyone listening, you feel like you need to binge to survive in those moments. Once you do it, you feel guilty, regret, shame. You wish you had never done it. But it's about recognizing that it's sort of a false desire. I mean, you feel it in the moment, but it's not what you truly want. It's just what your brain has been conditioned to do.
I do find your book to be cross-applicable, right? As you used rational recovery that was about drugs and alcohol to binge eating, your book, I think, takes that and builds upon it. I understand. I've read it. It's around...
You haven't finished reading it yet.
I'm almost done. I'm like the last couple chapters. It's a very good book.
Thank you.
but it has that cross applicability. I do think, and I think a lot of the listeners would have to agree too, there is an epidemic on food and food engineering, and how they, specifically manufacture food to hit specific spots in the brain. And so you're fighting not just the machine of your mind, but you're fighting the machine of this corporate world that's orchestrating food now to be those hit those pleasure zones. That's not an easy task to overcome there.
Yeah, for sure. Because a lot of the food that binge eaters typically binge on are those highly processed foods, those manufactured foods. So then, you're fighting that sort of chemical addiction to those specific substances and the habit, But I think that the more we say these foods are addictive, the companies are manufacturing these foods to make us addicted, you are giving up your power. Everyone has different reactions to certain foods, and for some it's stronger than others. And I totally sympathize with people who really feel like, they don't have control over certain foods at certain times. And it's okay if you need to not eat some of those foods for a while, like until you feel like you have that control. And that's sort of what goes back to everyone being different, everyone's recovery being unique. I mean, some people do need to give up certain foods for a little while, but that's an individual decision. But it doesn't mean we're powerless. It just means you're supporting yourself. You're giving yourself the best chance to eventually overcome this pattern.
Yeah. In the later chapters of the book, you talk like stimulant and then response and then action. I mean, I don't know exactly what it was. I read it. I swear to you. You do feel like, something happened. We try to cope with that. Maybe we coped with eating. And then, but again, you're not saying that the event was the trigger. It was the action.
Yeah. Well, the urge, I mean, in my approach, one of the biggest insights I had was that the urge was the direct cause of every binge. In therapy, I had spent so much time learning that an emotion had caused it. So, of course, you solve the emotion. You try to solve the problem. But that is just an endless cycle of trying to fix everything in your life, which is, it's not possible because all of us have messy lives and it's never going to stop being that way.
Some of us have things figured. No, I'm kidding.
You do not have things figured
out. No, I'm well aware.
We're recording a podcast amidst his laundry on his floor.
It's folded. It's mostly folded.
It's clean and folded.
Yeah.
Mostly.
All right. Here we go. You're going to call me out on my laundry, which is true. I'm staring at it.
We're not going to talk about my laundry room. So.
Well, let's talk about your laundry room. Bring that up. We can talk about your laundry room.
I prioritize what I do. I love what I do. I love my work. I love my kids. And sometimes the laundry doesn't get folded or put away.
Jimmy Hoffa could be in your laundry room. And he wouldn't find it.
I'm sorry.
I'm all right. But let's talk about other things, too, of your house. Let's talk about your pantry.
Okay.
I love your pantry.
It's a fun pantry.
Oh, first of all, it's a fantastic pantry.
I know.
And I think, like, when we first met, and you told me your story and everything else, like, I did not expect to go to someone's house that had an eating disorder, and had their pantry full of, like, Edamame donuts. And I love Edamame donuts.
In the box I recently bought, like, a month ago, hasn't even been opened.
Well, yeah. You know why?
It's a long story.
It's not that long a story. I ate the Edamame over a month ago, and they were stale. They were old by, like a solid month. It's not even like mistakenly ate them. I looked at the box, saw that they were expired, and still went to it. I did.
They're probably fine.
Yeah, it's an Edamame. But the point of the story I'm making here is you don't shy away from that. You don't shy away from the sugary foods. You don't shy away from the things that could be quote unquote triggers or things of that nature.
No, and they're really not appealing. I don't really eat the donuts. No. I mean, I like sweets. I like desserts. You eat with me. I enjoy a good dessert or a good sweet, but I would have never imagined when I was stuck in this binge eating disorder that I could one day have a pantry full of junk food and not even care. Yeah. Like I love healthy food.
Yes, you do.
And I also love delicious, pleasurable food that's maybe not so healthy too. So it's definitely a balance. I mean, I guess I'm just a failure as a parent. My kids they like sweets and things like that. And it's interesting because it's not off limits. They also don't care about it that much either.
They don't. So, boba tea is terrible.
Let's talk about the boba tea.
You want to talk about the boba tea?
Yes.
Let's talk about boba tea. Go ahead. Tell the story about boba tea.
Well, one of my daughters got into boba tea, and we go get boba tea a lot. It's delicious. I love
awful.
it. So I was like, Jeff, you have to come get boba tea with us and bring your kids, and we'll go and get boba tea. Why did you hate the boba tea?
Well, I don't know. I didn't know what to expect. First of all, I had very high expectations.
Because it's so good.
Like walking into Star Wars expectations. And I go and I get the tea. I don't know what to order. I'm completely intimidated because there's 75 choices. And it's not even like you have to pick the flavor of the tea. You got to pick the flavor of the tea and then your sugar amount and then your ice amount and then the type of boba you want.
And other mix-ins.
I mean, my anxiety was through the roof. through, and there's a line, and people are like staring at you because they've been there before.
Yes, it was.
They know what they're ordering.
I know what I'm ordering.
You know, it's like going to Starbucks. I want a mocha, or I don't know what it is. And you're like, I mean, so.
And tell them what you thought the boba was like.
Oh, lizard eggs.
Lizard eggs, yeah.
It tastes like lizard.
They're so good, though.
It's tapioca balls.
Yeah.
Why would you put that? It hit my throat. I mean, I got scared. It was terrible.
Okay.
All right. Boba tea. 2 thumbs up. What were we talking about?
My pantry.
Your pantry.
We were talking about.
So, you know what's funny, too? Because in the book, you always mentioned when you recovered, you said, like, you never turned down dessert after you recovered.
Yeah, I just had this mindset. I don't really know where it came from. I think part of it was giving up dieting. Like, I really wanted to give up dieting. I really wanted to have the mindset that I could eat anything, whatever I wanted. I had power over it. So I think it was like an empowerment thing. Like, I'm going to eat this and not binge. I don't know. And I think maybe it just became a habit. Like thinking, oh, I have to have it every time or I'm dieting. But eventually I came to see that like turning down dessert doesn't mean you're dieting. It just means maybe you don't want it right then. Or maybe you want something healthy. Or maybe you don't think it's going to make you feel good. And that's not dieting.
And so let's talk about dieting. Right. Yeah. That is the prominent thing that has led to binge eating, bulimia, and eating disorders. And it was 90%. Is that correct?
For bulimia itself, it's upwards of 90%. For binge eating disorder, it's dieting doesn't always come first.
Yeah.
Sometimes the binging, like overeating, increases over time and develops into binge eating, and then dieting can get mixed in there. But it's about half and half for binge eating disorder. Either dieting comes first or binge eating comes first.
Do you feel like that's still an issue in today's society? That the women must, because it's predominantly women. The men do suffer from it as well. We don't want to minimize that at all, because there is still an ideal body shape. Do you feel like that is still as prominent as it was 20, 30 years ago?
For sure. I mean, dieting is, but the way that dieting is carried out has changed. I mean, I think now there's more of like the intermittent fasting. There's not as much just like restrict. I mean, when I was dieting, it was like cut fat, cut calories, like really just try to eat as little as possible. And that's when you really get into trouble. I think now there is more awareness that just slows your metabolism down. It makes you more likely to overeat. It makes you more likely to binge. And I always try to spread that message that you have to eat enough. I mean, dieting is what gets people in this survival state where your primal brain centers are just focused on getting you to eat.
I think it's interesting. And so we definitely still, I mean, with social media and things of that nature, I mean, those messages are still being conveyed.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, it's still out there. The sort of perfect ideal body has changed over the years. I mean, now there's a different set of standards for women and men as well. That's different from when I was younger and involved in dieting, but there's still that pressure. I mean, no matter what form it takes, anytime you're trying to manipulate your body, you're trying to control what you're eating to achieve some ideal, it's just when we get into trouble.
Yeah. And let's talk about body image. Let's talk about your body image.
Okay.
So, quite slender. You were a cross-country runner.
Yes.
You still have that sort of body type. How does that make you feel when you're in, this community around binge eating and bulimia?
That's a really good question, and something that I feel like I had a lot of thoughts around for years, because when I was in therapy, I didn't really know what my natural body type was anymore, because I was dieting, I was binging, I was well over my natural weight, and it took a while after I stopped binging for my weight to gradually gravitate back toward what is natural and healthy for me, which has remained remarkably stable over the past 17 years. I think the way I eat allows me to maintain my natural body. This is the way my body shows up, like with healthy exercise, not overeating. I mean, overeating now and then, occasional overeating, but, satisfying my appetite, being active, following my hunger and fullness. This is the size that my body shows up. And that's going to be different for each person. And honestly, like, thin isn't really in anymore. Like, I wish my body showed up as a bigger body, but that's not what it is. Yeah. So that being said, like, I also realize that my story does have its limitations in that I don't know what the struggle is like to be in a severely obese body. Yes, right. I was slightly overweight at the height of my binge eating, but I was never obese. So I realized that struggle is not something I personally had to deal with. And again, that's why I bring in some of the recovery stories. That's why, in this book, I really acknowledge that this is what worked for me. Yeah. And there may be other challenges you need to overcome that I didn't, but that doesn't mean it has to hold you back.
Yeah, I feel like you're fighting these stereotypes all around binge eating. One, obviously, with the use of therapy and the non-use of therapy, if you will, with brain over binge approach. And also with the stereotype, well, a binge eater is someone that's overweight. and then remains overweight, or if even they fix it, and that's not, obviously that's not the case. There's a lot of people of different body types that suffer from this, and they can be muscular, they can be thin, they can be overweight, but it's finding that ideal weight for them.
Yeah.
And it's a healthy practice.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's something that whether or not you struggle with an eating disorder, I mean, there are so many people in this world who don't have eating disorders and still have body image issues. I mean, people in the fitness industry, a lot of people have a lot of hangups about your body. And that's why I don't think it's necessary to develop this perfect body image in order to recover. I thought that was one of the criteria for recovery, to develop this great body image. And I couldn't while I was like so over my natural weight while I was involved in binging. It wasn't until I learned what my natural weight was that I could really learn to accept it and learn to realize that, okay, this is just who I am. This is how my body shows up, and learn to be okay with that.
Yeah. Talk about overeating. We just took a trip to New Orleans. We met up with your family.
Yes.
We overate.
Did we though? I mean, I feel like the amounts of food weren't excessive at all. Like there was one day when we ate probably every New Orleans food. We had fried fish etouffee, we had red beans and rice, raw oysters, beignets.
Boudin.
Was that the same day? Alligator sausage?
Alligator sausage.
But I feel like
so
it was at meal.
Gumbo?
Yes, gumbo. Was it the same day?
Yeah, it was.
I don't think the boudin was the next day.
No, the boudin was the next day. We had boudin sausage for breakfast.
Yeah. So, but it was at meal times.
Yeah.
I don't feel like the amounts were excessive. I never felt like, oh my gosh, I'm so stuffed, I have to unbutton my pants and I can't. Like, we were able to go walk after and do other activities and get back to living. So I don't know if I would say that was overeating.
Yeah, that's a good point. So with this new edition, you did, as you mentioned, you added recovery stories.
Yes.
Why?
Because this is fundamentally my story, but I wanted to show that it's possible for you as well, and to bring people in to tell their own story and to show how they use the ideas uniquely for them and what challenges they have to overcome. And I just thought it was really powerful, and I think reading these recovery stories will inspire you to realize it can work for you too, even if your story doesn't look exactly like mine.
Yeah. It gets to me.
Yeah.
Because I think in one way or another, we've all been there, whether it's binge eating or another avenue, that you feel so lost. And to find something like your book that's helped so many people is so rewarding just to read.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I wrote it, that was the goal, to like, if I could bring one person out of this. Yeah. Because, God, I was in it for so many years and it was awful, awful. So I felt like if I could bring one person to freedom, that would have done enough. And just to get these stories and to be able to put them in the book. And there's a lot that goes into publishing a book, and you saw me not sleep for a while. And so you're in that mindset. But when I remember being in the room reading the audiobook and like sort of getting choked up reading some of them, because it's the first time it really dawns on you that, wow, like, gosh, the ideas that I've shared have really like made a difference.
Yeah. You've empowered these people to take control, and that's how I felt. Like, when, someone that doesn't suffer from binge eating, but has been a part of this, as most people, that this psychological industry that we're just told things of, you're so unwell, so you can't get better until you become well, which is never going to happen. Mm-hmm. Right? Like you mentioned in your book several times, you're never going to be whole. There's never not going to be a sad time in your life, but there's things that you can control. There's empowerment that you can practice. Yeah. And that's, to me, the overall message of Brain Over Binge. And that's why, again, I find it so cross applicable in other realms.
For sure. I mean, like, I thought when I was binging that there would be some day when I sort of had it all together and everything would be perfect, and then I could stop binging. Like, but gosh, I have been a mess for 17 years, and not in a bad way. I mean, we all are in some ways.
Beautiful messes, if you will.
Beautiful, exactly.
What would you say, and this makes me choke up when I think about this, because I can see myself in this situation. As you dedicate the book, every time I read your dedication, I tear up a little bit. What would you say to 19-year-old Kathryn? I know. It gets me every time.
God, I would just say just keep going. Don't give up. Like, you are going to get through this. This is going to be in your past one day. There will come a time when you won't even want to binge, when you'll have a pantry full of junk food and a lot of kids and a boyfriend eating it. I eat it too. and just, gosh, that one day you're going to help show people a way out as well.
And you also offer classes and coaching?
Yes, for sure. So when I wrote the first book, I thought that was going to be it. I thought that was I'm going to share my story. I'm going to hopefully inspire people. And the response to it was overwhelming. I mean, just it grew steadily over time, and I just kept going. I created a website, a blog, eventually a podcast, a second book, The Brain Over Binge Recovery Guide, which is the self-help version of the book. And then I created the online course, which you mentioned. The online course is just kind of all the questions I've been asked over the years that I answer in that course, and then also coaching, which with our amazing Brain Over Binge coach, Julie Mann, who does the one-on-one coaching and group coaching. If you really feel like you need that personalized support, you need someone to walk you through it, you need, the support of other people also going through this. So yeah, those are just all the resources I offer, and hopefully you can find something that helps you.
Yeah. And I want to mention too, because Julie Mann's stories in this book, right? Her recovery stories in this book.
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
And it's, again, I when I read it, I get emotional and I empathize with Julie Mann. It's so dynamically different than your story.
Absolutely.
And that to me is the biggest thing and I think to your point of why you added these recovery stories, their paths are so different. Mm-hmm. It's the goal.
Yeah.
That's the same.
For sure. And I think reading these stories will help you realize that even if you don't stop right away, that doesn't mean you can't. I mean, Julie's a great example that it took her years to really finally stop acting on these urges and to really give up dieting. That was a huge part of her story, to let go of that food restriction. It's possible at any age, no matter where you are right now. It's totally possible to put an end to this.
What helps the most with the coaching? So I've been with you a while now. I've seen kind of on the sideline of people needing help and asking for help. I have an opinion of what the coaching helps with, but I'm curious what your perspective is.
I'm curious what yours is too.
My I think it's really that there's such a fear. And I think a lot of people were in your situation, which is I've went to the therapy. I took it seriously. I wrote down my triggers. I went to this class. I did this. And nothing has worked. And I think the coaching, and when they get to the coaching, it's because the fear of failure, and the coaching helps them get over that hump and give them the confidence that they need to be able to say, you know what, I can do this. I can rewire my brain. That's my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're correct on that. And I think it's like talking to someone who has been there. People resonate with that, and she can give you so much hope and know that no matter how it plays out, that it's still possible to completely overcome this.
What's so interesting about Julie Mann that I find is that she is such a ray of hope. And I mean that she's like a ray of sunshine because she suffered for 40 years and she had failure and everything else. And I think because of that long trial and tribulation, she's able to connect with people more.
Yeah,
because I do think it's that core fear in people.
Yeah, for sure.
What's your mission for Brain Over Binge?
I just want to keep sharing my story as long as I can. I mean, part of me was like, nobody wants to hear this story again. But I think there is power in hearing someone's story rather than just, okay, this is what you have to do. There's a difference in just getting a bunch of advice or really reading about someone's journey and being there with them and then sort of adjusting it to apply to your own life. So I just want to keep sharing my story and then keep providing the additional help people may need to, create their own story.
Is there anything you'd like to add with the new edition, about the new edition? And one more thing too, as you said, where can people get it?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I think I just want to thank everyone who's supported me over the years, who has read the first edition, because when I wrote it, I had no idea that people would still be reading this book 11 years later, and it would have helped so many people. So just, everyone out there, thank you. And I love the new cover. That's another thing I want to say.
You do love that new cover.
I didn't like the old cover. I did the old cover myself with some software. I mean, at the time I didn't have help doing it. I mean, I didn't have the money for it. I just did it myself, and I haven't liked it for a long time, but I'm so glad to have a new cover. And you can get it on Amazon. It's in paperback and Kindle. And then you can get the audiobook, which I read myself on Audible. It's also on platforms like barnesandnoble.com, on Apple iBooks, and then Kobo Books as well.
Thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thank you so much for interviewing me.
Thank you for allowing me to interview you.
It was so much fun.
Good. One last question.
Okay.
Can I take you out for dinner tonight?
Absolutely. I would love to. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen today, and a special thanks to Jeff for asking me great questions. I hope you enjoyed listening to our conversation and that it helped you understand Brain Over Binge a little better, and also helped you to determine if the second edition is right for you. If you decide to get the book and it's beneficial to you, I would be so honored if you would leave a review on the platform of your choice. Thanks again for being here. I would love it if you would join me again next time for what will be episode 100. As always, I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.